Hello cave dwellers, welcome to the cave, and I'm so pleased to bring you what I think is our first show and tell in about 2 years. We're getting things back on track here in the cave. I'm joined today by Rees from the channel Ctrl-Alt-Rees. If you're not already subscribed, there's a link in the description. Go and check out his channel because you'll be able to find everything that we see today and a whole lot more. And boy, have we got some interesting stuff to show you today. It's all Atari themed.
Yes, I think Cabinet of Curiosities was the working title we kind of came up with, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm. And those curiosities include 1977's video music system,
the 5200, which was the successor to the 2600.
You've heard of the Atari 520 and 1040 ST, but what about the 260?
The Japanese exclusive 2800.
And where it all began, the C100 Pong. And if we have time, we can unwrap this very special prototype board. This episode is supported by MonsterJoysticks.com, purveyors of quality joysticks for all of your retro kit, joysticks, adapters, arcade control parts and more. Check them out at MonsterJoysticks.com, and we thank them for supporting the cave. So a huge amount of Atari to get through, and what better place to start than with a party in a box over here. What have we got here?
This is the Atari Video Music.
Atari Video Music. Very much a piece from the period, 1977. So we've got wood grain, we've got chrome knobs and dials on there, and big chunky buttons that you can click in there.
Yeah, so originally it was RF output only, so I've modified it with S-Video output, and I've also swapped the transformer in there for a UK one, so it can run on UK voltage rather than 110 volts as it would have been originally. It's not a games console, it's not a computer, as you can possibly guess from the styling and the name. It's actually part of a hi-fi separate system, so what you would do is plug this into your hi-fi system and into your TV, and it makes psychedelic, groovy 70s patterns on the screen in time with the music. So it was the very first music visualizer, so to speak.
Yeah, so anyone who remembers the days of Winamp visualizers and like me just staring at the screen at those visualizers, the dancing Coke can, can you remember any of the other ones that you used to watch? I was mesmerized by them. And this is exactly the same kind of thing, isn't it?
Yeah, so the whole thing is kind of implemented on one chip, which was custom designed for this unit. It shares a lot in common with the Pong, which obviously we'll be taking a look at, and the 2600 console as well.
Okay.
It was the same team that actually worked on those, on the Pong and the 2600, who developed this. So yeah, and quite an interesting story behind that as well, and how it kind of came to be.
Well, you'll see it working on the screen here, but you really need to hear the audio to get the full effect of it. So let's just cut away to a demo of this. This is playing our Hoffman Cave Sessions vinyl record here via your laptop. So a collision of 2022 and 1977 here. And you'll get a feel for just how this works. Let's have a listen. So my first impression of using this thing today was that it's quite responsive. You know, there's no real delay between what happens in the sound and what happens on the screen. It's impressive, isn't it?
Yeah, so it's not as if it's a computer that's actually running code or anything like that. I mean, it's all discrete electronics, so it's all pretty much instant. So yeah.
And we've got options along the front here, lots of buttons that we can push. So you were watching it just then in auto mode, but we've got these options on the front. So there are 4 main visualizations, aren't there? So I've got to look at the front of it here to just remind myself what they were. So we've got the solid, which is sort of a diamond shape on its own. Hole, which is the same.
With a hole in the middle.
With a hole in the middle.
Yep.
Ring, so the hole grows.
With a bigger hole in the middle.
Hole in the middle. And then auto. So those are the main shapes of the visualization. And then you've got some more controls along here. So first of all, you've got the horizontal. So you can have 1, 2, 4, or you can press the N button there for 8. All of these colors are brilliant, by the way. It goes from orange.
Very 70s.
To sort of light brown, medium brown, dark brown. Oranges and browns. So you can have 8 on the horizontal, and then again 1, 2, 4, or 8 on the vertical. And then if you have 8 and 8, you get absolutely everything on the screen.
Yep.
Dancing away. But the nicest thing I think we found was to put it on auto, wasn't it?
It's just fun to sort of watch it cycle through all of its various modes, I think.
Yeah. It's an interesting thing. Was it a success?
It wasn't, no. Atari couldn't find anyone to stock it other than Sears, the big department store in America. And essentially they stocked it for, I think, just under a year until they just cut the whole thing because essentially they weren't selling. So quite rare on eBay. You never see them in the original box or anything like that. Usually they're not working. Or they're untested, so to speak. I was lucky that I managed to get my hands on a working one, but it's not a common thing at all.
There's a bit of a sort of a myth, an unconfirmed story behind the creation of this, isn't there? The company culture, perhaps, has something to do with the invention of this. Yeah,
so allegedly, Atari were known for their hot tub parties, their company retreats, they called them. You probably refer to them as work events in this day and age. Where they'd all go out to the California hills and rent a big house and just have a whole weekend-long party. And it was some of those parties that actually led to some of their early hardware and game ideas and stuff, and some of their more creative ideas. So what exactly was happening at those parties, I'm not sure. But it was the 70s, so...
Yeah. So something psychedelic came out of those parties. I'm glad that it exists. It's a nice thing. It's a nice tangent from the normal things that you see from Atari in that era. And it's nice to see that they were experimenting with things. And how much would that have set me back if I'd gone to Sears in 1977 with a view to picking one up?
So the RRP for that was $169.95, which, taking inflation into account, is about $780 today, or about £580.
It's a rich person's toy, for sure. One use case that I would love to have seen this in 1977 in a disco on a massive projector all over the world. That would have been amazing to see the visualization in time with the music. I would have liked to have seen that. And I think it has actually appeared in some music videos, hasn't it? I think Daft Punk have used it in the background of one of theirs.
I think Devo used it as well in one of their music videos. So yeah.
So from partying with the Atari video music system to their roots in the home market before the Atari 2600, they had this. Now what's this, Reese?
Yes, so this is Pong for your home TV, as it says on the box. And this was Atari's very first attempt at a home games console, so to speak, so a TV game. And of course is the home version of their hit arcade game, Pong. So the original arcade game was released in 1972, and then this followed 2 years later in 1974. So
the original arcade, Alan Alcorn came up with that. I think they gave it to him as a kind of a side project to test him out and see what he could do. And he surprised them by coming up with this Pong arcade, which was a smash hit. And then the 70s was just a slew of Pong clones, wasn't it? Now, was this the first to come into the home, or were there others before it?
Yeah, well, that's the funny thing, really, because there were a couple of other companies who actually beat Atari to market with home versions of Pong. So even though it was their game and that they invented, this wasn't actually the very first home version that existed. So.
Well, yeah, you say they invented it, but it's debatable, isn't it? Because you had table tennis on the Magnavox Odyssey, but I think that was inspired by Pong. Or if it wasn't, before all of them, you had Tennis for Two, which was that demo on the oscilloscope, wasn't there?
That's very true.
So there are multiple people who could lay claim to that. But Pong was certainly heavily associated with the Atari name because of the success of that arcade machine. Here we are playing it. We had three intense games.
We certainly did, yeah, including a game that unfortunately didn't get recorded, which
we pressed record, and it was the greatest game
couldn't have scripted. I know, it was intense stuff.
Down to the wire. It went 15-14. There were intense rallies going on. What you're watching here is not the greatest game of Pong. It's just a tribute.
That's the one. So one of the features that this had that the competition didn't have is on-screen scoring.
Yeah, I can see that. I'm just looking at the side of the box here. I'm going to read it out to you. Being very careful with this box because it's in such great condition. It says, your screen becomes the playing field with colour, in brackets, on-colour TV sets. Because let's not forget, that was a luxury back then. Digital scoring and sound. Switches from playing field to regular programming with one button. What does that mean? Switches from playing field to regular programming with one button.
Yeah, so that's just a reference to the external switch box, so you could switch it between Pong and your normal TV aerial signals.
I see.
Yeah, not really much of a feature, to be honest. But
incremental speed on volleys keeps game constantly challenging and new. What surprised me as soon as you turned it on was the colour. No, I don't think the arcade had colour, did it?
No, so there's quite a famous story actually about the engineers who developed this. And basically they got the prototype all complete and finished, and they took it to the upper management. And they took one look at it and they loved it. And what they had developed was what would go on to be the most sophisticated integrated circuit that would be ever featured at that time in a consumer product.
Wow, okay.
Which is another of Pong's claim to fame. But yeah, one thing that they weren't keen on is the fact that it was in black and white, and obviously colour TVs were starting to become popular at that time. So they demanded that the engineers add colour to it and only gave them a couple of days to implement it. Now, there's quite a famous story that one of the engineers on the project had come from a background in TV repair and had actually worked with colour testers for NTSC TVs, and they use a very basic circuit to generate the colours on screen. And essentially, within the space of a couple of days, they'd added the components to generate those colours, took it back to the upper management, who presumably were probably in the middle of another one of their meetings, and saw the crazy colours on screen and were wowed by it. So that's how it
works. I mean, there's no correlation between what the colours are doing and what's happening on screen. It really is as if they've integrated a TV colour tester into it, bolted it on, and those colours are just kind of swirling around on the screen, aren't they? But it does elevate the whole experience. It does make it feel like something a bit more special, I think.
It does, yeah. I mean, it's not actually part of the actual chip itself or the actual game graphics themselves. It's something that's added on and sort of overlaid afterwards. But yeah, it's very effective.
But I did notice something fun in the manual. I think is the manual in there? Yeah,
it is, yeah.
Just grab that. So just to try and lengthen the experience and the amount of enjoyment you can get out of this, there's a section in here which says to play Pong, and it explains the two-player game, and then it says solitaire. So this is a game mode that is in writing only. There are no buttons to enable this or anything. And it says sharpen your game or just have fun playing Pong by yourself. In this game, the minimum score wins, so you should try to lock up the ball into a repeating pattern and then not readjust the player controls. 0-0 is the best score. So I'm not buying it personally. They've just thrown this into the manual to say, can you line the two bats up and just get the ball going back and forward infinitely? It's a stretch. It's not a game, is it, Reese?
No. I mean, to be fair, it was the 70s. Perhaps there wasn't a lot else to do. But I have actually done this myself at home. We did have a go earlier at trying to do this, set it up in this way, didn't we? But we couldn't quite work it out. I think it takes a lot of luck. But yeah, essentially you get it to the point where the ball's just endlessly going backwards and forwards, and that's it.
It just reminds me of people watching their DVD players.
Yes.
When the screensaver comes up, just waiting for that moment when it perfectly bounces into the corner. It's the equivalent of that, I think. But I don't think anyone ever put that in the manual of the DVD player. Here's a game you can play, solitaire, with your DVD player. Well, two iconic Atari devices there in the video music system and Pong. Now let's go to something that's probably a bit less familiar to some of you, and that's this device over on another table over here. I told you we'd be using the full extent of the cave to show all of this off today. and this is the Atari 260 ST. Now, I have to be honest, Reese, this is the first time I've seen this model in my life in person. Where do we even begin with this? What is the 260 ST?
Yeah, so the 260 ST is quite an interesting Atari ST model. If you Google it, you'll find a lot of references to it being a 256K version of the ST. But I found that that's actually not the case. I committed the cardinal sin of being wrong on the internet.
Were you quickly corrected?
I was quickly corrected, yes. When I first got my hands on this, I did an unboxing video of it, and obviously I regurgitated that so-called fact, as a lot of people do. And I suddenly had a lot of Germans in my comments correcting me, saying they owned this machine from new, and it definitely did come with 512K of RAM.
Right.
So I did some more digging and a bit more research, and it's quite interesting. The 260 ST was originally sold in the Eastern European and Scandinavian markets in 1985, was the release model of the ST. And the reasoning behind the 260 essentially was that the ROM version of TOS, obviously the operating system on the Atari ST boots from ROM, and that wasn't actually ready in time for the computer to go to market. But Atari being Atari, they decided to just release it anyway and cobbled together a very basic bootloader that would load TOS from floppy. And that led to a situation where TOS ended up taking up half of the available RAM on the system. So you have a 512K machine, approximately 200K taken up by the operating system, and you end up with around 260K. So
that's where the name originates.
To save themselves getting in any kind of legal trouble, they released it as the 260 ST. But yes, contrary to popular belief, it is a 512K machine, same as the 520 ST. So Atari, once the TOS ROMs were ready, did offer that as an upgrade, and you could take the computer back to your computer dealer or Atari dealer who would perform that upgrade for you and put the proper TOS ROMs in there. So it was only a temporary situation. And that means that the ones with the original floppy bootloader ROMs are actually very rare because most people would have had those swapped at some point.
Right, okay. So that would then have brought it in line with a 520 ST. The ST, of course, came before the FM, so the floppy disk wasn't built into the 520 at that point. So like that, this had an external floppy drive with a massive eject button.
Oh yes.
What's that all about?
Yeah, it's interesting, an interesting styling choice, isn't it? And Atari did actually change to smaller buttons before too long, so it's only the very early examples of those drives that have the big buttons. But I really like the look of them, but I know not everyone does.
It looks like you just have to punch the disk drive to eject the disk. I kind of like that. And just tell us what's on the screen. Oh, by the way, we wanted to demonstrate this today, but we had a last-minute failure with that floppy drive. I think somebody punched the eject button too many times, didn't they? And it wasn't just the floppy drive because we tried a GoTech. So not only are we making full use of the cave to show all of this stuff, we're now in Reese's house to see some footage of it when that disk drive was working. No doubt you'll get it working again. And he's got that footage because this is yet another machine that he's made an episode on his channel. So once again, all the links will be in the video description if you want to go and see any of these items that you've covered in more detail. This is a really fascinating one. And we'll see some games running here. I can't tell you what at this point because you're going to send me the footage.
I can't remember, to be honest.
Just enjoy the games that you're seeing on the screen. And then we'll cut back because there's an unusual screen here, and you told me that you won't see this screen on any other Atari ST. Just what's happening here? It's quite colourful.
Yeah, so this is a fake version of GEM. So you see the menu across the top, but the options don't actually do anything. In fact, I don't think there is actually any GEM code in this screen. I think it's just styled to look that way. But yeah, this is part of the floppy bootloader itself and never made it into any other version of TOS. So unless you own one of these early machines with the floppy bootloader ROMs, you've probably never seen this before. Yeah,
a colourful rainbow of error, basically, telling you that your floppy disk drive's not working. You know, it looks pretty, but that's just about all we could do with it here in the cave today. The joystick and mouse ports, are they in that annoying position underneath or are they elsewhere?
They aren't, no, they're on the side, which is a far better position for them. It was only when Atari decided to put the floppy drive on that side that they put the ports underneath the keyboard, which is about the most awkward location they could have possibly chosen.
Yeah. So I think this is a really interesting machine. If you happen to own one, I'd love to know in the comments, where were you based? Why did you choose this? Did you have the option of any other Atari? Maybe this was the only one you could choose. And what did you do with it? Leave us some stories. Maybe we'll get a few more German commenters or someone further afield to tell us what they did with their 260 STs. Were there any other oddly named one? I think there was like a 1-something ST. Was it a 180 or something like that was never actually released?
Yeah, there was one planned. There was the 130 ST, I think, which was
it?
announced, but they essentially decided that they couldn't get one working with that little RAM. And I think RAM prices were coming down so quickly at that point that they just never went ahead with it.
So
but it was announced, but I don't think any were actually made.
There we go, another fascinating machine, the 260 ST. Onto another system now. You have, of course, I'm sure, heard of the Atari 2600. But what about this, the Atari 2800? This is another new one on me. Reese, where does this fit into the Atari family?
Yeah, so as I'm sure you can probably tell from the styling on the box, this is a Japanese model. And Atari had actually been importing machines into Japan, importing the 2600 into Japan through their official importer, Epoch. It wasn't selling well at all. The Japanese market basically didn't like the wood grain and chrome switches and that kind of stuff. They thought it was outdated.
What sort of year are we talking here?
So the 2800 was released in Japan in 1983.
Oh, okay. So you can understand then why the wood grain might have been a bit old and long in the tooth at that point for them.
Yeah, so it was actually released alongside the Famicom.
Right.
And so as you can imagine, and it was also 3 times the price of the Famicom. So it was the equivalent of about £500 today in today's money.
Wow. Okay, 3 times the price. So the performance then, this must have been like the Neo Geo of its time for that price, right?
Yeah, well, it was the Atari 2600 of its time, in a slightly tarted up case and with some slightly interesting controllers.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, it was outdated by the time it was released, and yeah, a massive commercial flop over there. So
it is essentially just the Atari 2600 hiding away there in a slightly different case.
It is, yeah. I mean, the case was specifically designed for the Japanese market, but Sears did take an interest in it, and they did release their own version under the name the Video Arcade 2. So it was available in America.
God, you would have been disappointed if you owned a 2600 and your parents went out and got you a Video Arcade 2. Here's the latest and greatest thing, guys.
Well, that's the thing, because the original 2600 was sold under the name Sears Video Arcade. And then they released
it was pushed as a sequel to it.
The Sears Video Arcade 2, which was exactly the same hardware, just in a slightly updated box. Yeah.
You would have been gutted. Was it backwards compatible with your 2600 cartridges?
It was, yeah. So there weren't any Japanese exclusive games or anything like that. It was literally just the 2600 library or a subset of. The boxes and the manuals were all localized into Japanese, but the cartridges themselves are just identical to the original US NTSC releases.
I did notice while I was playing that the joysticks are very different to the classic 2600 stick that we all know, that single button stick that's become so iconic over the years. This is more of a pad that you hold in your hand, and it's multifunctional.
Yeah, I actually really love these. I think they're really nice to hold, very ergonomically designed. And not only do they work as a normal joystick, but the stick itself actually rotates, so it acts as a paddle or a spinner as well.
Yeah, and we put that to the test playing Breakout, and it worked really well. That nice analog dial, it was very smooth, especially for its age. I had a good game of Breakout. And then I played some classic Atari 26/2800 games, including Moon Patrol, Spy Hunter. Not a bad conversion. It's got that cool music in there.
I'm not sure if you could describe it as music, but yeah.
It was true to the arcade.
It's recognisable, yeah.
Recognisable.
At least.
You have modded this one as well?
I modded this one last night.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because I really wanted to show it off. I wanted to take this opportunity to kind of show it running, and I didn't even know if it worked. So I've owned this thing for about 2 years now and had it proudly displayed on the shelf. And
Okay.
yeah, it was kind of make or break last night. Chucked a very quick and dirty composite mod in there. Thankfully, it did work.
Wow, so this really was the first day of actually playtesting the thing and enjoying it. And enjoy it we did. It worked very well indeed. Do we know how well this did? I mean, I'm going to stick my neck out here and say if it came out head-to-head with the NES at 3 times the cost with 5-6-year-old technology, I'm going to say it flopped. Am I wrong?
Huge flop, yeah, huge flop. Finding them for sale boxed now, I've been watching them for years now, and I think that's the only one that I've ever seen that came up for sale in its original box. And even loose, they're just so uncommon. And the boxed games, I think they're 2 of 3 games. The other one that I saw came up for sale just went for really ridiculous money, so I didn't jump on that one. But
so these things probably ended up in landfill back in the day, just as excess stock.
Yeah, they're probably. I'm sure there's a Japanese version of that famous ET landfill somewhere with a load of 2800 cartridges buried in it. So
yeah, and also you mentioned to me while we were playing that there's 4 joystick ports instead of the usual 2.
Yes, but as far as I know. Because there was never a version of the 2600 that was released with 4 ports, and because there were no games that were exclusive to the 2800, nothing actually ended up taking advantage of those 4 ports. So yeah,
that's crying out for some homebrew, isn't it? A 4-player.
There's probably modern homebrew that can use it. I have to admit, it's not something I've looked into.
Maybe like a Bomberman clone or something like that.
That would be good.
Or even Light Cycles or Tron. You know, that kind of game would be fun with 4 sticks. So. Maybe, or a 4-player Breakout or Pong with the spinners. We'll have to check out the homebrew. If you know of anything, let us know in the comments that we can try out. Have you got 4 controllers?
I have got 4 controllers.
Oh, okay. We can definitely try it out. And you've got the flash cart, the multi-cart.
Yep.
So, yeah, let us know if there's some homebrew we can try and we'll give it a go.
Definitely.
Let's move now to the big one, the Atari 5200. Before we go into any of the details about the history or the specs of this, look at the size of it. It's a beast. And to give you some perspective and some idea of scale, we've compared it to some other consoles that you'll be much more familiar with, including the Super Nintendo here, which it's completely dwarfed by, so much so that we could also add a rather dirty, I apologise, Sony PlayStation, and a Game Boy, and it's still bigger than all 3 of those combined. Or to put it in another way, it's bigger than the original Xbox, which is an absolute beast in itself, and an Atari Lynx. Capacity-wise, it can hold both a muffin and a Mars bar. And once we'd established these very important facts, we took our lunchbox away and we plugged it into our B&O telly to have a game and see what the 5200 was like when compared especially to the 2800, which we've just been playing on. So Reese, just tell us, as I'm playing Pac-Man here, and that's a game that we need to talk about in a moment because that's an important one, just tell us how we got from the 28 or 2600 to the 5200 in the range.
So as soon as the 2600 was released, Atari started working on the successor pretty much immediately. And it turned out that they actually had a bit of a change of direction when it was finished and ended up shelving it for a few years. But it was released in the form of the 400 and the 800, the home computers.
These are the home computer micros, okay.
So yeah, it's the exact same architecture. Jay Miner was involved, you know, the father of the Amiga, which I'm sure your viewers would appreciate.
It's really hard not to say the word Amiga throughout this whole episode.
It's relevant. But yeah, he was involved designing the chipset for those, of course, quite famously. So yeah, they released the 5200 as a console eventually, but yeah, it kind of went up that torturous route.
So it is essentially a 400 or an 800. It's got the 4 joystick ports, hasn't it, like the 800 had. Did the 400 have 4 as well? I can't remember now off the top of my head.
I think the 400 had 2. My 5200 is the later model with the 2 joystick ports, but the originals did have 4.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So both versions were released.
Okay. Did that mean it was even bigger? because our muffin and our Mars bar, I should be clear, the muffin and the Mars bar holder at the back of the lunchbox there, that's for putting your controllers in, isn't it?
That's very true, and actually the 4-port version didn't have a bigger controller holder at the back, so that's a bit of an oversight on Atari's part, yeah.
Yeah, I'm still trying to get over the size of the thing. What year did this come out in?
1982 this was released.
82, so before the NES. Did it make much of an impact?
Not really, no. It was never released outside of the US. It had a bit of a poor reputation because of the controllers. It had analog joysticks which weren't self-centering, and yeah, the kind of games that they promoted and they released on it. I mean, Pac-Man was the pack-in game with the 5200, and it's just completely awful with an analog joystick. It's a completely inappropriate game, and yet there were games like Missile Command and others that took advantage of those sticks that yeah, would have been a better choice, I think. Yeah, the 8-bit home computer ports are some of my favourite arcade ports. I think they're some of the best that Atari ever put out, and obviously they were straight ports from those home computers to the 5200, with it essentially being the same machine internally. Unfortunately, it doesn't run the same cartridges. They went with a slightly bigger cartridge format, which wasn't compatible with the home computers. In today's money, it's a very similar price to a PS5 or an Xbox Series X.
Okay.
Yeah.
And this was falling, in North America at least, about the time that they had their video game crash.
Yeah.
So that wouldn't have helped things at all. Let's just go back to Pac-Man briefly, because it doesn't look or play like a particularly bad port compared to that legendary Atari 2600 version. In that one, Pac-Man doesn't even rotate when you go down the maze, but on this one he does. Nice sound effects, nice little death sequence as he disappears. I quite enjoyed playing this Pac-Man.
It is an excellent port of Pac-Man. Obviously, like I said, the same as the 8-bit home computers, the Atari's 8-bit computer version. But yeah, it's just let down by the joysticks yet again. When I was making a video on this system, I tried to get through to the animations that play every few levels, the intermission animations, so I could show those off on a video. And it literally took me about half an hour just to get to the point where I cleared the first 3 levels just to get one of those to play. It's that bad. But there are adapters available, so you can use it with other joysticks. And there is the excellent trackball controller, of course.
Pac-Man we played off of this. Now this cartridge, it says a loaner cartridge on there, and Pac-Man is handwritten, Pac-Man Rev A. Return to Prototype Lab, Consumer Division, Software Department, Atari. Tell us the story behind this, because this looks pretty interesting.
As with some of life's most interesting things, I bought that on eBay, probably late on a Friday night after a couple of glasses of wine. But yeah, these are quite collectible, so these are sort of prototype cartridges. Some of them are early versions of the code that were used internally for testing. That one, I think, was a loaner, which was probably sent out for QA or for a reviewer to review the game, something like that. I have taken the EEPROMs out of that and dumped them and compared them to the final version of the game, and that is it is the final version of the game on that
bit
cartridge.
By bit, it's identical.
But still an interesting thing to own, obviously, because of that label and the history behind it.
Yeah, okay. Well, that was a fun thing to try. And you also had this, I'm assuming this is an original peripheral, or I call it peripheral, a piece of plastic that you could slot the 2 joysticks into, right? Was this a...
It is, yeah. That was released at the time with the console, and that just came with it, so yeah.
Now, I found the Robotron port to be very enjoyable. Got through to, I think it was about wave 12 or 13. I was having a lot of fun with it, but I was constantly fighting these joysticks, which are not self-centering, as you said earlier. So you're really moving, you're just kind of dragging these sticks. It's almost like you're driving a forklift truck or a tank. You know, you've got these 2 great big levers, and you're constantly fighting them. So, for example, in Robotron, if you don't recenter the right stick, which is doing the shooting, you're just constantly shooting in that direction, and you've just got to kind of precisely try and find its way back into the middle, into the dead zone. It's a struggle. Yeah, I was really torn on this game because it felt like a really good version, but I was fighting the joysticks.
It looks great and it sounds great, doesn't it? But it's just, yet again, it's let down by those controllers. And it would have been such an easy thing for Atari to fix if they'd actually
They had a good joystick.
made the effort rather than just cancelling the whole console.
Yeah, they had a good joystick in the 2600. I don't know why they veered so far away from it. Was this ever sold in the UK, the 5200?
It wasn't, no, purely released in the US and didn't last very long there either. So it was on the market for around a year. And,
okay, so we've got to import these things if you want to see them over here. I have seen one of these before. I had the chance to buy one a few months back, and I turned it down because it was missing, I think it was missing the flap on the top. Into which the controllers go, and it had sort of a chunk missing off the side, and I thought, well, these things are so rare, I'm going to struggle to come by the spares to fix this, so I'm just going to have to wait for a nicer example or import one from the US, which I'm assuming, is that what you did, or did you find one in the UK?
No, I did import it, yeah. I think it came from one of those, what do they call them, the lockups,
okay,
one of those clearances. The box smells a bit damp, but thankfully it all works fine. So
excellent.
Yeah.
Well, we challenge you, if you can think of a console that is bigger than this, in size, not in sales numbers, that wouldn't be too difficult to beat, let us know. I think this has got to be top of the chain so far.
I think so.
Biggest console I've ever seen. Now then, we come to the mystery item, the surprise item at the end of our smorgasbord of rare Atari items, and what a trip it's been. And I cannot wait to see what's in here. Do you want to do the honours and unwrap us here?
Yes, this was very hastily and crudely wrapped last night, so we'll see how this big reveal goes.
Yeah, just explain to us what we've got here.
So this is a prototype of the Falcon 30 motherboard, which was the successor to the Atari ST, which was released in 1992.
It wasn't called the Falcon, was it, originally?
It wasn't, no. So the code name for the Falcon was the Sparrow, or the FX1. So these are known as Sparrow motherboards. There are 21 that are known to have survived. And there were two different revisions, revision 1 and revision 2. This is a revision 1, of which only 5 are known of in the wild.
Wow, this is a rare piece indeed. I'm going to have to hold it.
Go on. So
okay, we've got the Motorola 030 CPU up here, have we? Is that what that is? Or would that have been here?
Yeah, so these big sockets are where the custom ASICs would have gone. So you've got the Atmel and the Combel, which were the the graphics chip and stuff on board on the Falcon. So they were still in development at the time, which is kind of a big reason that these motherboards were created to test those custom chips. It's a 68030, so the Falcon was obviously created as a competitor to things like the Amiga 1200 and the Next Station, those machines. That CPU wasn't in it when I got it. That's something that I bought and stuck in there just because that's kind of the period correct one. Same with the RAM expansion as well. I looked at this on my channel when I first got it, which led to a huge debate about whether I should try to get it back into working order or whether it was better off in its current state, telling the story that it tells. As you can see, it's got command strips stuck on the back where it was stuck on my wall at one point. So yeah, nice wall ornament, but I think it would be a huge amount of work to get that up and running again.
So these weren't these bodge wires, this was in development, do you think?
No, so yeah, those bodge wires would have gone on to have been actual traces that were incorporated into the final motherboard design, so they're just sort of finalising things there. I actually tracked down a lot of photos, all the high-res photos and things that I could find on the internet of these prototypes, and I put together a bit of a bill of materials with all of the chips and things. So I know what all of the missing parts are. The main problem would be the custom chips. They're pretty much impossible to get hold of. But the other thing is this kind of tells a story as it is, kind of the story of Atari as they were at the time. As you've mentioned, obviously there's a lot of stuff that's kind of hanging off it. And you can see that the solder's kind of been partially melted and some of the components have been sort of partially melted as well. And I think what's happened is some engineer at Atari has come along and obviously they were putting together a revision 2 prototype and needed to RAID this for all of the bits to put that together. And obviously the way that they've done it is just in a complete rush and ended up kind of ripping it apart.
Just coming with a heat gun and
bending
going,
pins.
I don't care if I damage anything
No,
around.
I mean,
I just need that bit.
It's a prototype, you know. I mean, obviously, in hindsight, it's historically important, but at the time, it was created to serve a specific purpose, and that purpose was served. So
if you got this working, it would essentially be a Falcon, or would it still be fall short of the final spec of what it became?
It would not run final Falcon software. So these ran TOS 2.07, which went on to become TOS 4.4, I think it was the final version on the Falcon. So there isn't actually any software out there that would run on this anyway. So the ones that work, and there are complete systems out there, including the cases. The cases were also for sale for a while as well. The cases came from California. A company called Best Electronics bought up all of Atari's old warehouses and got their hands on the old cases.
Okay.
This came from New York, from a company called Wiztronics, who were quite a well-known add-on and upgrade developer for the ST, who bought out Atari's offices and warehouses in New York so they could get their hands on all of that old stock. So that's where all of the Sparrow motherboards have come from. Yes.
Well, it's a fascinating historic piece. I think I completely agree with you. The effort involved and the reward that you'd get from fixing this, it's probably not worth it. It's probably much more interesting to keep it as is, as a snapshot in time, as a prototype, and as something that you can see a lot of engineers have just come and manhandled and ripped things off of. You know, it tells its own story. A little bit of Atari history, and it can't have been many years after this that Atari as we knew it disappeared.
Yeah, of course the Falcon was kind of a last-ditch attempt, and too little, too late, along with the Jaguar as well, and it was kind of the last thing that they ever really put out. So
feels like a sad end to our show and tell. A kind of broken motherboard with bits hanging off.
Yeah,
of it.
It's an accurate reflection of the story of Atari. I think we've gone from the sort of their glory days through to a couple of missteps to this.
Well, it's been really fascinating. Thank you so much for bringing this in to show us. Lots of episodes on Rees's channel that cover these things in more details. Where can they find you, Rees? Just remind us.
Yeah, youtube.com/Ctrl-Alt-Rees.
Ctrl-Alt-Rees. Same name on social media.
Also on Twitter and Instagram, yeah.
Go and give them a follow. Give them the RMC hug with a subscription. And I hope you've enjoyed the return of the show and tell. Take care, everyone. Thanks for watching, and bye-bye. Say bye-bye.
Bye-bye.